Hi everyone, Sheila Butler with Successful Women Talk, the show showing you how to work smart, be productive, and reclaim your time. On today's show, I have Sidhu from SidekickPM, where she helps entrepreneurs from idea to launch. And today we are talking about her new ebook, From Stuck to Unstoppable. It's a great read. We'll talk about that and much, much more. So join me and I will see you on the other side of the interview. Hi everyone, this is Sheila with Successful Women Talk. I want to say thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. Today we have guest Sidhu from SidekickPM.com. She has recently launched a new program, new ebook called From Stuck to Unstoppable. It is terrific. I can't wait to share that and her story with you. So welcome, Sandy.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me, Sheila. It's so exciting to be on the other end.
Be on the other end of it, yes. And what she means by that, if you don't already follow Sandy, which you should, but she also does an interview show. She's techie, and not only techie, but she has a lot of different experience in project management, etc. But she has an interview show, so her being on the other side of the camera, so it's always kind of fun, right?
Yeah, it totally is, and especially when I also watch your show, so it was really cool when you asked me to be on it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I love what you do. I follow what you do. So let's do this. Let's start by just a general little brief background on what it is that you do and how you got to where you are today.
Sounds good. So basically what I do is I help primarily women entrepreneurs get tech unstuck in their business. So what that really means is I help them figure out what tools and technology they should use to help them launch their products and services, because too often people kind of get blocked by all these things that they think they need to do. And I kind of come in there and help them break things down and move them from idea to action.
I love that. But let me step back a little bit further. How did you get into that? So what is your background that gives you that knowledge base to do that?
So my background, I'm actually a software engineer by study, and I worked in the high-tech industry for over 12 years. So I started in the pre-bubble era as a software developer. I did software testing, software team leading. Eventually, I found out that I was an extrovert and I loved being in front of people, and I still love the technology aspect. So I gradually moved more towards a product manager and marketing role. So I really got to work with the customers, figure out what the market requirements were. So take that big idea and then work with software developers to make it a reality. So and that eventually led to me getting more involved again in marketing and social media and figuring out how we can get closer to our consumers.
I love that. So then you kind of came full circle. So you took it from a high level and said, hey, I could really break this down a little bit and help individuals, because sometimes we, not only women, but we're going to focus on women today, we get stuck, especially with technology.
Exactly. I realized that I still have this passion for technology and I liked helping people. So I figured, how could I bring those two together? And that's where I started with my sort of consulting, freelancing practice, where I would help entrepreneurs with their product launch strategy, or just figure out how they could take this idea and make it a reality.
Now, did you start out with your consulting side of this in your business while you still had a full-time job, or did you just go, hey, okay, I'm done, I'm going to go out on my own, and here I am?
It kind of happened after, when I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and then things didn't really, I didn't decide to do it right off the bat, like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and launch this consulting practice. It was kind of a gradual thing where I got to the point where I was like, okay, this could possibly be something I could do full time, because it's hard to do something on the side, right?
It's hard, especially to do it well.
Yeah, and initially, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, and this is something that I addressed in my ebook, is that we don't always know what it is what we want to do, but we know we want to do something. And I didn't really have a clear idea that, okay, this is exactly what I want to do, but I just kind of looked at all my skills and I looked at what people kept asking me for help with. It was like, okay, how do you do this? Or how do I set up my website? What should I use? Oh, I want to do a webinar. Can you suggest tools? Or you seem to be pretty good at social media. Can you explain to me what Twitter is and how I can use it? So I just kind of started feeling my way around that, and things started to kind of connect looking back, and here I am.
Here you are, and you're doing a great job with it. So let's talk about that. You just wrote a new ebook, From Stuck to Unstoppable. So let's talk about that a little bit and maybe go through the book. And I loved it, and I know kind of the whole process of it, but let's talk about what causes someone to get stuck and then the steps that they can take to be unstoppable.
Sure. So working with different entrepreneurs, the things that I kept seeing that come up often were not even getting to the technology part. It was just even the mindset, the whole idea of, okay, should I do something? And then what is it that I should do? And then even that whole idea of, will I be successful? So sort of that whole self-doubt, we kind of move through this sort of these phases where you start thinking about it, you kind of dip your toe, maybe look at that domain name, think about getting it, but then you end up being your own barrier. Like I had a similar experience when I decided to launch my interview show. I was like, oh yeah, this is really exciting. I want to start talking to people. And then I was like, oh, well, who am I going to interview? I don't have this long list of people waiting. And then I was like, people are going to be busy, just kind of made excuse after excuse without even really trying. And then when I was like, okay, let me just email a bunch of people, they all wrote back and they're like, yeah, I love it. I'd love to be on it. And
I agree.
I felt like, I was like, Sandy, what's wrong with you? Like you just almost didn't do something that you really wanted to do because of yourself, not because of someone else, right?
We sabotage ourselves. And I was the same way. I was afraid, like, I don't really know anybody. My previous business was an offline business, and I could interview some of those people, but they're still kind of offline. So that really didn't work. And what I have found after doing 40 interviews, and you've probably done more than that, but posted 40 interviews, is that I've had one person say no. And she's a researcher at a university, and she said, I'm busy in the middle of a big research project, but here are 3 people that I would suggest you reach out to. So she did say no, but she directed me on another path. And I think that's the most inspiring thing that I've found, is that most people really do want to help and are willing to do it if we're willing to ask.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole part, is getting into that idea of asking and having to possibly deal with that fear of rejection. But it's more often than not, like you just said, it's not even going to be rejection. It's going to be like, oh, here's 3 other people. Because I think that's just one of the things we have to get over.
I agree. And we have to put ourselves in, we are an expert at something. Maybe we're not at their same level, but we can get there.
And people generally do like to talk about themselves. So I think with an interview show, you do benefit from that. So.
Right. Okay. So it's basically the first step is just starting, getting over yourself and just starting.
You have to move out of your own way. Sometimes you just have to decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and start looking at the steps you're going to take. So whether in the case of an interview show, do you have to learn something? You have to figure out what tools you're going to use. You have to figure out what resources, who you're going to be interviewing. So then start listing the things that you need to do to kind of make that project a reality. And I think another key thing is also breaking it down, because too often we might have this big idea that seems really daunting, and then we're like, forget it, it's impossible. But if you actually decide that, okay, you know what, I'm going to do one interview every 2 weeks, it sounds much more manageable than, oh, you know what, I have to do an interview show and do 5 interviews every single day of the week, because then suddenly it becomes more time consuming.
Yeah, and we put that pressure on ourselves too, right? So we go, okay, if I'm going to do it, I have to be the David Simon Garland or the Andrew Warner or other people doing those shows. Well, they had to start somewhere too. And I think, like you said, breaking it off into bite-sized chunks is so much more palatable and tolerable.
Exactly. And I think also what people tend to overlook when they do launch something, whether it's an ebook, a video show, is that there's a lot of effort that goes into the creation aspect. So, putting this show together, putting the ebook together, but then there's a whole part that you have to actually get it out there. So for example, for every blog post you write, there's the time you take to write it, but you also have to go out there and promote it, share it, comment on other blogs, that whole piece that some people tend to overlook, that okay, I'll spend 6 months creating something and then it's just going to sell itself. But
great point.
You have to plan for that as well.
Great point. All right, so what's our next step?
So, wow, we kind of went back.
We've almost kind of summed them all up, haven't we?
Kind of. So basically what I would say, so once you figure out what it is that you want to do, so you have that idea, you probably want to start doing some research. So I talk about this in the ebook that you can take advantage of various tools. For example, the Google keyword search tool. So this is free to use. Do some market research. See how people are searching for certain terms online, because how you may position yourself and talk about what you do because you're an expert may not be the same way that people who actually have that problem are searching for it. So you can actually get some insight. Another great tool to use as well is something like Facebook Insights. So again, you may not be buying ads just yet, but you can go in there in the back end and, set up an ad, see how big your market of women entrepreneurs in the US who are looking for a particular service may be. So again, a lot of people kind of worry about not having an audience to begin with that they can potentially survey. But if you've built relationships with people online, you could potentially reach out to them and say, hey, would you be interested in running this survey to your audience? And in exchange, I can let you share the results or something to that effect. So
that's
I think
a great point.
There's different ways to look at it. So once you've started and you've started to figure out what it is you want to do, there's different ways you can research. But I think I jumped a little ahead because figuring out what you want to do is a problem that a lot of people have. And like I mentioned earlier, when I first started, I didn't have a clear path that, okay, I want to help women get tech unstuck. I just knew I had a bunch of skill sets. So I started to put feelers out there and see what I could help people with. And the big thing that I think helps people is think in terms of problem and solution. So what problem are you trying to solve? What pain point can you address and use your skills to provide a solution to that? So for example, I have a friend who was, and I talked about her in the ebook, she was a, fitness buff. This is what she would do every single day after work. And eventually she realized that this is something she wanted to do full time. But she didn't want to just go out there and train anybody and anyone. Initially she did because she was just building up her client base. But gradually she started to figure out that the people she wanted to train weren't necessarily people who were going to go do fitness competitions like her, but people who just wanted to adapt and have a healthy lifestyle. So she gradually figured out her target market, but she started with this problem, people who want to lose weight, women within a certain demographic who wanted to lose weight, and started to work on it from there.
I love that. And she just kind of fine-tuned it as she went along, but she started somewhere.
Exactly. I mean, she did not start with, okay, I need to get a website, I need to have business cards, I need to rent gym space. Not at all. She started by just going to the gym, doing her thing. People started to ask her when they saw her training people, like, oh, well, how do I get in touch with you? So she started to do it like that. And I think that's where a lot of people tend to get stuck on, is that once they do have this idea, they think that, okay, I need to go out quickly, get a domain name, build my website, SEO like crazy, and then the customers will come. But
exactly. Yeah, it's funny, Sandy. I interviewed a lady a few months back, and I think Gretchen Zellick, and she did a fitness product. But it took her 7 years to launch the product. And although she learned a lot during that process, she said she almost waited too long because she wanted everything to be perfect. And then she tested it, and then that had to be perfect. And then she changed it, and that had to be, and she kept testing and testing and testing. And although now she has a successful product, she says to everyone, she would probably have launched much, much earlier because she tried to perfect everything.
And in the software world, and it's becoming sort of mainstream now, the notion that everyone's talking about, the idea is the minimal viable product. So the whole idea of, really developing that core and that one thing that problem that you can solve, and then get out there, start testing it with potential customers, see what works. And again, to address the point you just mentioned, people now, what they're doing, instead of waiting 7 years, is like, okay, maybe I can release one video at a time, build that audience, see if there's a demand, rather than waiting for so long, and then the market might change. And I've seen that a lot when I worked in the software world. We'd work for like 2 years on these huge projects with tons of requirements, and then by the time the project was done, you're like, oh, so who's buying this? They're like, oh, well, we're going to have to wait because now we don't have that customer anymore.
Exactly. Another thing I've seen is that people introduce, like, especially with software, a lot of the things that people don't really need. So they put a lot of bells and whistles in there, and then later on they find out people didn't want them in the first place. So maybe you're right. It is best to start with a minimal viable product and then get it out there and then make iterations as you go.
Right. And going back again to the fitness professional example, she didn't necessarily have to build that website right away. And it's great to go out there, go to networking events, talk to people and get that feedback on like what exactly do people want. And then, build your website in parallel. I just think that a lot of effort goes into having to create content, having to search engine optimize your site, that it's going to take a lot of time. And that time that I think your first few customers aren't necessarily going to come through your website. They're going to come through word of mouth.
I agree, and it's funny, and this is a bit embarrassing to talk about. But when I started my online business, like I said, I'd been an offline business, very successful, 7-figure business for 7-8 years. And then when I went online, when I first started, I wanted the same business that it took me 7 years to build. So I wanted that today. So I thought I had to learn everything about SEO, and I wanted to know everything about it tomorrow. And I wanted to know everything. My website had to be perfect. And I was building it around what the perfect solution would be. Well, what I really needed to do was just launch it and grow it as I grew my following. But it was really hard for me to go, okay, just start.
Well, I think that's, like, everybody has a bit of that perfectionist in them, as well as that whole fear of like, I'm putting this out there and what are people going to say, and dealing with that sort of judgment. Because I've worked with people who are like, I need help. I want to set up my blog. Like, what should I do? And I'm like, okay, well, this is, how you can set up your website and, get a bunch of posts up there. And they hesitate when it comes to hitting publish. They're like, oh, it's not perfect yet. I could make it a little bit better. And I hate to break it to them. And I'm like, you're not going to get all this traffic the first day. Like, it's just as great as it sounds. And I hate to break it to you, but that's just not the way it works. Like,
if just get out there, because at first no one's reading it. Maybe not even your mom.
Unfortunately not.
Exactly. Yeah. I love also that you really talked about breaking things off in bite-sized pieces. And in your ebook, you talk about a little 8-year-old girl that wanted to I think it was knitting. She was learning about knitting, and her teacher said, or mentor said, we were going to do it in pieces. We're going to do little squares. So you were able to, the little 8-year-old girl was able to reach, okay, that's a goal. It's just a little piece at a time. So a little piece of content at a time. And then all of that was going to come together to build a beautiful sweater. And that little 8-year-old girl was...
It was me.
It was you. And you've taken that learning experience back then, and you've applied it to what you're doing today and what you're teaching others today as well. I love that story.
It's funny how that story came back to me when I was writing the ebook, because you tend to not always relate the experiences that you've had in your childhood to things that you're doing now, because you're like, oh, I've learned so much in between. But as I was doing it, I remembered so clearly, just like you said, the teacher was like, okay, we're going to have a knitting club. And I was like, okay, that sounds really cool. But I didn't know a thing about knitting. That was just something I thought my grandmother did. And basically, she showed us what the final sweater would look like. And it was just patches of different colors. But I was just obsessed the minute I saw it. I was like, I want to make that. That just looks really cool. And she just showed us, she's like, okay, just knit rectangular patches you're going to probably need like 30 of them to make this little sweater. I mean, we were pretty small. And she's like, I'm going to help you put it together. You just focus on the little patches and the pieces. And I remember, like, all I was doing after school was like knitting. I think at some point my parents had to have like an intervention. Like, I come from a family, so knitting is like a hobby. You do it after you do all your math and all that. But I was just like, gotta knit, gotta
do this.
And in the end, like, I don't even think that many people made it to the finish line, because some people just got bored. But I got my sweater and I was just like, there, it's done. And I think that's what a lot of people have to do, is break things down, focus on that final goal. Like, what is it supposed to look like? And just work gradually. Like, whether it's going to be an online program you're doing with like 20 videos, focus on doing one video at a time, and maybe even trying it out with a small group of like beta testers, see what they think, or your super readers or your super users, and getting their feedback, and then incorporating it before you work in complete isolation, and then 6 months later have something that nobody's really receptive to. I
love that. I can apply that. As you know, I'm a logistics, customer service, and systems nut. Okay, I can admit it. I probably need to see a therapist about it, but I am. And what I find also when I'm helping my clients as well is that if we can see the big picture of what you want your company to be, then we can build all of these little things, put all these little things in place, all of our little knit patches in place, and eventually we're going to build this picture. We're going to put it all together. It's going to be this great picture for you. But when you start out thinking, oh, I've got to systemize my entire business, it sounds scary. But when you think about the little bitty pieces and how they all come together to build your knit sweater, it all makes sense. And I kind of do the same thing with the clients that I work with.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Let me ask you this, since I did admit that I am a systems nut. What type of systems do you have in place, or do you, that have helped you get to where you are today? Do you just fly by the seat of your pants, or do you really have some systems in place that help you get there?
Well, I'd love to say that I have like all the systems in place and I'm super organized, and sadly I'm not. I'm not a systems queen like you probably are, but what I've realized over time is that you do need a system because things get chaotic. Like, you write a blog post and then you have to add the keywords and then you have to, share it. So I've started making myself little systems because after reading Michael Gerber's book, E-Myth,
yeah.
I was like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely like in my business all the time, doing every little nitty gritty thing that eventually when I do get a virtual assistant, I'm going to have to like train that person on how to do the things that I'm doing, because I'm sure there's things that I shouldn't be doing that are better off that someone else could do much more efficiently.
Exactly.
So,
and I bet you're a little more systemized than what you think.
I'm getting there. Like, I think part of it is also just when you're in, let's say, the 9-to-5 world, you're used to certain systems and certain things happening at certain times. And then when you break out and start working on your own, you kind of look back to that and say, okay, how did things work so that things are a little more smooth? So I have started developing checklists. So for example, when I do a blog post, I know, okay, I've written the post, I've added the keywords. Now, where am I going to share it? I have certain places that I share it regularly. Same thing when I do a video interview, I have a template, and I know you do this as well, so that blog post has like the same beginning and the end, and then it's just like the meat of it, which is like the content from that interview. I put it there, and then I go on YouTube, I share it with certain keywords. So like they're starting, but I can't say that I had like everything down pat. And I think another thing is just also being organized, like using tools, like in your email, for example, like using something like Boomerang so that you're not always replying instantly to people, because you don't need to, but it just helps cue things and make you remind. You can send yourself sort of reminders. So I find that helps when it comes to also email management.
You made my little systems heart pitter patter. I love that. Hey, Sandy, we talked a little bit about your book, but if someone wanted to get your ebook, where would they get that? And if someone wanted to connect with you, where would you like to send them?
Well, for my ebook, you can go to FromStuckToUnstoppableLaunch.com. So that's where you'll directly be able to purchase the ebook and get more information. I'm also going to be having an audiobook for those of people that want to just listen on the go. So that'll be available there as well. And then to connect with me and read all my awesome content, you can go to SidekickPM.com. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Sandy Sidhu. That's SandySidhu.
Terrific. And we will also link all of this up in the show notes. Sandy, I appreciate your time. Love what you do. If you guys don't currently follow her, you should. Get the ebook. It will help you figure out how to get unstuck to become unstoppable. Sandy,
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Sheila. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thanks. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Successful Women Talk. Listen, a lot of people ask me, Sheila, how did you build a business from 0 customers in revenue to thousands of customers and multi-7 figures within a few short years? Here's the secret sauce. We had great products, excellent customer service, and we leveraged our systems and processes. If you want to learn more about this or how to reclaim your time, join me over at www.successfulwomentalk.com, and I'll show you how to get the life, business, and customers you want. Thanks so much.